Maybe I should buy some wine.
What do you got?
It says all of that sweet red
Mm-hmm.
is 25% off with 2 or more, but I don't see any more
You
than
don't
just
see 2.
one.
So they don't have any Beaujolais.
I wonder if I can mix and match
How about
those.
Walking Dead? Would that count? Probably
Oh,
not.
man. Well, that's what we're called.
Oh yeah, the disfellowship wine.
We should just get that just for giggles.
But they don't have
Wish I had my
Chianti,
picture.
they don't have
Burgundy.
Beaujolais, they don't have Burgundy. But he did point out this stuff, which is kosher for Passover. So that's, we'll do that. We'll get a big bottle though, because we really love Jesus. Okay, we're off shopping for like coronavirus necessities, and I see this. I used to dream about this stuff when I was a kid. Hot Wheels when I was a kid were like $1.36 for a while. It was crazy. And look at that, they're even stocked up on Mustangs. I'm totally cleaning out.
1 cup of flour, 1/4 cup water. No salt. Mix it just a little bit, and then ball it up. I think I overmixed it just a little bit, so I'm going to add just a little bit of water, just a very, like, couple of drops, just so I can get it to stick together. It's pretty dried out, so. My oven is already turned on to 450. It probably would have been better if I just mixed it by hand instead of using my mixer, but
That's not hot water, by the way. It's just always sitting on the stove with
it's boiled
water
out,
in it.
but yeah.
Yeah, it's boiled, but just because it's always just tea water, you keep on the stove, just replenish it.
So I've got a little bit of flour here. I'm just gonna put it on my board. This is a little bit tough, but I'm just gonna roll it out anyway, so it probably isn't even gonna matter.
It's just a cracker. It's a flatbread. It's not rocket science. There's no screwing it up, really.
There's no yeast in it, so you don't have to, no salt.
Just roll it out thin, and when it's tougher, it'll probably be a little tougher rolling, but
So here it is. It doesn't matter if it's a circle. You're just gonna stab it with a fork next. Grab a fork right now. You just stab it with a fork so that way, I don't know why they do it. That's just the way I've always been told to do it. Because like I said, there's no yeast in it, so it's not gonna rise and bubble up.
will it separate and
Shouldn't.
bubble?
Shouldn't, I don't think. I don't know. So
But you're just going to break it up, so it don't need to be a circle or nothing.
Yep, so now my oven is just dinged. So I'm going to throw this on a plate, like a cookie sheet plate, and bake it in there at 450, I think it is, for like 8 to 10 minutes. So I'm going to put this on this sheet, and then put it in the oven. I like cooking with air bakes, but my air bake only goes to 350. And I don't want to ruin my good cookie sheet, so I'm going to just use this cheap pan, put it in here for, like I said, 8 to 10 minutes. It's done.
How long's it been in?
I don't know, I'm just going to be watching it, but about 8 minutes, 10 minutes, as long as it takes to make a salad.
We're just having a couple salads for dinner.
Yep, feels hard. Hard like a cracker.
Pick it up and drop it.
It definitely feels done.
Perfect.
Yep, done.
But I actually had made wine a couple of years ago, and I thought, hey, this will be perfect time to break that out because I don't use anything, no additives. But it had vinegared, so now I'm using it as
Salad dressing.
salad dressing. Little vinegar and oil salad dressing.
Okay, we let that cool, and then once it's cooled off, you can break it up.
Simple.
And then use it for your...
And the pan's jumping around.
Yeah, it's the pan. It got hot too quick. Okay, cooled. Let's break it off. And that's good.
Man, we should have done memorial before. That way I could have that with my salad.
Yeah, it would have been good.
We actually just ate. And it's interesting, we probably could have done that. You know, that's kind of, I'm kind of being a little Pharisaic in that statement because in reality, you think about what Jesus did. They actually used part of the Passover meal in
Good enough. Check.
in the memorial observance.
Done.
But along with what I was saying before, going along with 1 Corinthians 11, I think it's 22, you've got houses for eating. We didn't want to confuse the two. Maybe that's a bit Pharisaic because it's there available. It's not like you can't eat it. Whether you're a partaker or you think you should partake or you should not partake, it's the actual occasion during the observance. Whether or not you should feel like you should partake. I shouldn't say feel. Whether you discern you should partake or not. And by the way, this isn't a memorial wine. This is just a Zinfandel or a blush. This is a pastor to our kitchen. Or this is
It's the only wine we could get.
only wine we could find. If I can find it, there it is. Which is it's funny, if you look up in the Watchtower Library, you won't find this one because it's, I don't know if that comes out forward or backwards when you actually watch that on video, but it's, I'm sure it's a Christendom wine in their thoughts because it's used for as the guy that we
Communion is what it said. Yeah, communion wine.
recommended it for us, said it was a communion wine. And it says right on the bottom of it, it says it's kosher. For Passover, which means that, which is kind of surprising if you taste it. And I've got a little glass here of it, but if you taste it, and boy, it brings back some memories from when I was a kid. Let me tell you. But it's very Moscato-ish. You want to try it?
Oh, it smells like grape jelly, like Concord grape jelly.
It's very Moscato-ish. Trust me.
It smells
it's
like
syrupy, but
Yeah.
Moscato-y. Go ahead. Very palatable for the average palate, I would say, but I would much prefer a Beaujolais or the Chianti or
Burgundy. I like something earthy.
It is kind of
Earthy
burgundy-ish, but
Yeah.
of course Burgundy is more earthy, but this is made from Concord, which it's funny, if you have a Concord grape, it's not really that sweet in comparison, but that's almost like an ice wine. Anyway.
Can you imagine drinking that down with a peanut butter and jelly sandwich?
You just have peanut butter and that could be your jelly.
Yeah, maybe it would grow on me if that was the case.
It's funny, we were talking earlier, Tiffany and I, where we were chit-chatting, and she always has these great subject matters to talk about until we get behind the camera. And I'm like, well, save that for a video. Save it for a video. And by the way, I'm sorry it's very grainy. We're actually looking at it and can see that it's very grainy. But for whatever reason, whenever it's not bright light, which is great when we're able to get back into the vestibule, which should be soon, because the final part of the last days of winter have occurred this week. It was 50 degrees, I think, today. So our snow was it's been
It's almost gone.
melting fast, except for the big, huge piles. Now it's a mud mess. Even our asphalt is disintegrating up front in our street. But
that's another topic for discussion.
but
so irritated.
But that's just winter frost heaves coming up. It happens.
Yeah. So hopefully the next video or next couple videos will be back out in the bright light, and the videos will be better quality.
Yep.
Anyway.
Out in the festival. We just didn't have time to do spring cleaning, which is kind of why we wanted to do this video. We didn't plan on doing another memorial video, but the reality is that we wanted to do a video that demonstrated that it doesn't have to be some elaborate ordeal. And last year we had the time and circumstance where we wanted to try a memorial, not kind of emulating Passover, not being involved in Passover, but emulating Passover and what Jesus would have ate. And I think this year, just because of our busy schedule and whatever else, it's been more of a situation where it's, I don't want to call it last minute, but it's just don't have a whole lot of time available to do an elaborate meal and whatever else. As you saw, we threw a salad together in 8 minutes, and we're going to do the memorial on our own after this video, probably. But we had a discussion earlier, and I don't know if we can remember what that was or not.
I won't remember everything.
Do you want me to tap into something that you were talking about? I mean,
yeah, if you want, maybe it will kind of spur a little bit on.
We were talking a little bit, as I recall, and if you see a shadow here that goes across my face, we have a light back there in the background to kind of illuminate the situation more, but apparently it's too low. I'm not going to mess with it. But we need to have a fund set up like the Watchtower to where people send us money repeatedly throughout all eternity, so that way we can fund a $1 billion video studio.
No.
Well, that's what Watchtower's doing. It seems to be working fairly well.
Yeah, and they're unrighteous.
Except for this coronavirus thing is probably really putting a damper on it. If you're not seeing the box, I'm telling you, you're not dropping as much. But that's a funny point. I remember our local elder who thinks he owns the Kingdom Hall was saying when there was a Watchtower, I don't remember I think it was still when the Watchtower was producing the Watching the World articles. And I loved those articles. I thought they were very good for bringing some up-to-date things in as far as the spin. But one of the things they brought out, I think, was that the Catholics I think it was Catholics, it might have been other religions just in general, but they were using the old swipers. And
credit card machines.
That elder blasted that. He just
from stage
blasted it.
Oh, he was like going on and on about it, yeah.
But I don't, from what I recall, I don't remember it from stage. Perhaps you do.
I do.
But anyway, either way, it wasn't a couple years before Watchtower was running the old cards with the swiper machines, and he was eating crow. So that was pretty interesting in regard to that. So we were discussing upstairs. We were discussing how in Watchtower land you are, or at least some people have felt as though they are not partaking because of Watchtower. In other words, they're not convinced in their own mind that they should be partaking or should not be partaking, but they felt pressured to go one way or the other in regard with that. And I'm reminded of the scripture, though, that says, be convinced of your own mind. And we'll, as we always do, post it up there because my brain doesn't remember the numbers. You might. You remember that one?
Not accurately, no.
I claim it's like Jesus. He didn't say a number. Of course he couldn't. And he just says, it's written. And so I get off on that one for just being stupid. But the reality is that you should be fully convinced in your own mind. And also the scripture says not to be partaking unworthily. But we'll get into that in a moment. But some people feel like, and I get it. I remember even speaking to an elder about this, and the subject of partaking was coming up. And I said, in any case, Rome wasn't built in a day. In other words, some people who claim to be anointed think they got this light bulb that pops off in their head, or I don't know, maybe it's a 2x4 that slaps them in the back of the head, or maybe it's a Christendom pastor that comes up and gives them a good right hook and calls it being slain by the Spirit. But whatever it is, we've known individuals that claim they're anointed, and they just say, "Oh, I just feel that I should partake now." I'm not going to mock them. That's on them. But the scriptures say not to partake unworthily. And it does say to be fully convinced in your own mind. And so it shows there's a certain amount of reasonableness there. You should be able to defend or know why it is that you're doing what you're doing. So that shows that there's no shame in not partaking as well. Again, I'm getting ahead of myself. But I told that elder, Rome wasn't built in a day. And everybody who partakes is looking like they're nuts. And I told the elder that. They think you're just batty. Because unless you're the governing body, and even in literature, so while it's not necessarily from the elders that you're nuts, and some certain people will hold you up in the congregation, I personally always had the opinion, who cares? Because they used to throw that weight around the same as they would an elder, or they're an MS. Go ahead, you want to say something?
No, I was just going to say that's just a political move.
Yep.
Political.
So-and-so said this, and they're anointed. Yeah, and you know that for a certainty. The Watchtower even says they might be insane. So, while the bottom line is that it should be nobody else's business, it really isn't. And some people say, "Oh, you have to partake, otherwise you don't have life in yourself." We do get into a difference in verbiage as far as life in yourself. The other side, and just everlasting life or living forever, and there is a difference. There's also a difference in whether you are there, for instance, an inauguration for a president. How many people are there? Several thousand? Mm-hmm. How about the inauguration or the swearing in of a senator, governor? How many people are there? And yet how many people are being sworn in? So you can be in support of that governance and not be sworn in. I'm just presenting both sides of the argument here because you've heard them all, and I come from Christendom, and so that's, I guess, a unique perspective as far as individuals that have been raised as witnesses, and it's the same thing of whether or not you should partake daily or monthly or weekly. When that was said about don't be partaking unworthily, did it just mean, or whenever you partake it, did that mean that it was going to be weekly? Well, what did the Passover lamb replace? What is it that Jesus Christ replaced? What day was it? Was it not the Passover? If the Passover was held how often? Once a year. And likewise with many religious observances even in Christendom today. Easter, how often is it held? Every week. How often is Palm Sunday? How often is Christmas? How often is, we could go on and on and on. How often are these observances? They are annual observances. Again, Passover, if it was an annual observance, why would it not carry through that the Passover lamb is an annual observance? Again, we're not stipulating what anyone else should do, but we are showing that there are two sides of that argument, and it's up to each and every individual to do the research and decide those things for themselves. So there's an argument for both sides of them, and we're not here to make that argument. We're not here to tell people what they should do or what they should not do. But it's oftentimes, just as there's pressure inside Jehovah's Witnesses not to partake, because you'll be crazy or because of whatever reason, there's just as much pressure in the ex-JW community to partake. Oh, you're denying the Christ. Well, if that's the case, if you decide that right at that moment on an annual observance, you discern that it's an annual observance, and I'm not saying you should say that, I'm just saying if that's the case, and you discern that it's an annual observance, and that moment you also discern, for whatever reason, that you personally are not worthy to partake, and you don't partake at that moment, are you denying the Christ? So the next day, if you die in a car wreck, are you denying the Christ? If the next week, because if it's you think it's an annual observance, or you believe that it's an annual observance to carry on the tradition that was actually the command that was handed down to the Israelites and carried on as a tradition by Jesus when he instituted it at the Passover meal. If you believe that it's an annual observance and you don't partake and you die, even if you believe it's a weekly thing or it's a daily thing, and you don't do it because you think you would be partaking unworthily at that moment, and you die the next day, do you believe that you died denying the Christ? See, so that same line of thought that people will say about witnesses and that, oh, I feel pressured where I shouldn't partake. At the same token, ex-witnesses saying that if you don't partake, you are denying the Christ. It doesn't add up, one, scripturally, or even to common sense reasoning with other scriptures. So we're not here to tell you what to believe and whatever else. The bottom line is that you have a personal relationship with Jehovah God. And guess who your mediator is? It ain't me. It ain't her. It ain't JWs. It ain't the elders. It ain't the governing body. It's Jesus Christ. And you and I and her will be responsible to ourselves, in and of ourselves, and for the reasonings we give at that moment. Who are you to judge the house servant of another? The reasonings we give for why we do what we do. And there's nothing wrong with discussing it amongst ourselves in a reasonable fashion, and why it is we think a certain way or why it is we don't think a certain way, or bring up arguments that are without arguing, but bring out different reasoning points that show how we believe. There's nothing wrong with that. But we shouldn't be pressuring other people like Watchtower, or hypocritically by saying Watchtower pressures us not to partake when you yourselves are saying, oh, it's the rejection of the Christ. It's not. I just pointed that out with the scripture that says, don't partake unworthily. In either way, no matter whether you believe you should do it all the time, whether you believe that the anointed should do it only, or just everybody does it, the scripture says what it says, so it doesn't stand up to reasoning to say that you've denied the Christ by not partaking. So anyway, you look like you wanted to say something. I'm off my soapbox for the moment.
No, I think just the bottom line is that let people live. That was our complaint with Watchtower. So many XJWs, that's the complaint. Watchtower doesn't let people live. Doesn't let people make decisions, doesn't let people do the research, they just don't let you do anything under absolute their scrutiny or control. And so just don't be like them. Let people make their own decisions.
That's right. And there's nothing wrong with having your viewpoint or sharing your opinion in that regard, but don't condemn someone else with it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And this channel is not a platform for, I don't even know. This platform is for people to express themselves, for us to express ourselves. I don't know if I'm going to say that.
Yeah, and mainly when we started this, it was about, and we don't care whether it's sort of funny, we don't care whether people are drawn to it or not. That's great if they are. If it helps somebody, that's wonderful. But I remember when we talked, what should we do for our closing? And for a while there, we're like, remember when we discussed our closing statement, what it might be?
I can barely remember. It was something like, see you next time, or don't. We don't care.
and that was it. Yeah, just kind of a funny, thanks for watching or not.
We're not dependent
whatever.
on YouTube. I mean, people make careers out of this, and it's fine for them, but we're not dependent on YouTube. But we do like community support, and we do like to share ideas, and, this isn't my life. YouTube is not my life.
Yeah. That'll be a good cracker with salad and whatever else. And that's the other thing. When you do make this, remember it's not about all flavor. Don't think about the herbs and spices you can put in to make it better. You can do that later on your own if you like. You can make
authentic.
You can make your Toll House chips anytime you want. Tiffany earlier said, what did you say earlier?
What did I say?
It was something about, why didn't Jesus Christ use chocolate chip cookies?
Oh, I know.
She was just playing. She knows why, but
I know why.
There's a symbolism.
Yeah, I know why, but I like cookies. I'm drinking coffee. It's dark, but I drink coffee when it's dark. 'Cause I'm always tired.
Speaking of which, you got some blood builder.
Blood builder and some liver thing. I don't know.
What's the blood builder?
Builds your blood.
Oh, I should have known.
Not even part of this video.
Vitamin type of a thing. But what else we were talking about upstairs? Remember?
I think I had mentioned something about. A lot of times we're trained as Jehovah's Witnesses to read those scriptures about Jesus and that execution and his death and that time period, to remember that. It's always recycled every year.
And that's a good thing. That's not a bad thing, by the way.
I'm not knocking it. I'm just saying that's what the
itinerary is.
Yeah, that's what the schedule says, exactly. And this year, I seem to be thinking more of the actual Passover instead of, not that I'm forgetting Jesus, that's not what I'm saying, but what Jesus was reiterating.
You're just talking about your own personal meditation.
But my own personal meditation and just thinking about that Passover in Exodus, the original Passover, and when they would have the lamb and the bitter greens and the unleavened bread and the wine, and they would have that meal, and they ate it in a hurry, and all those things that symbolized something.
Which is an interesting point. If I can interrupt you, or
and one more thing just to say
ahead.
is that it was almost emotionally for them while they were eating that. It was like almost they were in a sense of panic, and. Given the outbreak of this virus situation, people are, whether you're a witness or not, whatever religion you are, you're not really in your element like you normally would. And you're not going to be going to Easter Sunday, church or mass, or you're not going to be doing those same types of things that
Probably.
Most likely, because even like I've seen on news articles that some churches are getting in major trouble because they're having Sunday service. So most likely not. Who knows? We'll see. But,
and that goes to this perfect point is that, and we've thought about doing
she needs to come up here.
That's all right. You grab her.
Come here. Come here. Come here, you cookie monster. Come on, cookie monster. Yeah.
You're eating. I want a Christ cracker. A little bit of chip. And I guess, and I don't mean to belittle it, but in a way, I want to show that the emblems are exactly that. And they were that with Jesus Christ's meal that they had from the Passover. And I was going to make that statement, though. It was interesting because Tiffany had mentioned they eat it in a hurry. Yet, how do we read that Jesus Christ ate it? to show that there was this little bit of Pharisaic legalism there, and it could have been they were reclining at the table. They were reclining at the table. So some of those commands that you should eat it in a hurry, they weren't necessarily practiced in Jesus' day, apparently. So it's interesting that the observance shouldn't be so legalistic to where we just forget the points that were brought out. Same with the Passover itself. And we were discussing that a little bit as far as, going back to you're talking about the meditation of the Christians, for example, in the day of 70 CE.
Yeah.
And it reminds me when we had that discussion with that gentleman over, that older gentleman that was the Bethelite and
the missionary
and whatever else. He'd worked at Bethel for years. And I had said to him, well, it was that way when Jerusalem fell too. They believed they were worshiping the right way and Jehovah was going to come in and save them. But the true Christians knew they could recognize the things that were going on that were wrong inside of Jerusalem. And really had been wrong for a long time, but it finally culminated to an end. And Jesus Christ had said, "Get out of her, my people. Flee to the mountains." I quoted Revelation there too.
Mm-hmm.
But
Flee to the mountains
is what I believe.
Quit shaking the table.
Sorry. But so when you think about that, the mountains were an isolated place, even a lonely place. So those that are in and they recognize the wrongs that are going in with what was supposed to be true worship, is it the time to get out of her? It's definitely time to get out of Christendom. We know that. I mean, I'm not going to even argue that. There's a lot of people that end up, they're witnesses and they turn to Christendom because they grew up as witnesses.
You have to be careful how you say that.
Why? And here's why I say that. I come from Christendom. Again, I don't know if I've said this before, but this isn't a show-off point, but just to show the depth of how I understood religion. I won an airplane ride over Seattle when I was a kid by memorizing Bible verses. So at a young age, I was surrounded in a church. I won't say everything that happened in my household was religious. I'm just saying that church was a major factor in that. Now, later on, it didn't play so much. And then it picked up again as I entered my 20s, I guess. And then I went on basically a studying spree, if you will, with all sorts of different religions, Mormons, Seventh-day Adventists, witnesses. Then we had a Catholic that was across the street. There was a hardcore Catholic, and a lot of people with Catholicism, it's interesting. A lot of times people will say, well, I'll just quote a guy. I knocked on his door out here we were at. I said, I'm looking for people that are interested in reading the Bible. And he said, I'm Catholic. We don't read the Bible. Well, this Catholic church that was behind my house in Idaho was actually one of the very few that had their service in Latin still. And witnesses will say, well, how can you possibly know the Bible if you're doing your services in Latin? Well, I'll tell you, they absolutely do know their Bible. And they, for example, will bring out the scriptures where Paul called himself father of the congregations. Am I saying I agree with their biblical stand on that? No, I don't. Because Paul also said he fathered the congregations, but he did found those congregations. He did father those congregations. In what way did the priest at your local church found or father that congregation? So I don't agree with their stand in calling the priests father, for example. But still, they knew their Bible. They knew it was in there. I'm not saying I felt that they had it accurately, and each one must make that discernment on their own. But it goes to show that they did know their Bible. So considering my history in that regard of being from that background and around many different Christendom religions, And Christendom, if you just look it up, it's not a witness term. It's just what generally Christians call themselves as those who are Christian. So Christendom, coming from that background, it's not new to me to hear those teachings. And I've already proven to myself why I don't believe this one or that one or whatever else. And I don't know that that's what this channel is about. It's not that I don't mind discussing those points individually with people. But this channel was about the injustices that Watchtower does to us, and a little bit of a therapeutic aspect to get a hold of others who still have maintained their faith, and yet, granted, shaken, but still maintained their faith, despite the abuses of Watchtower. But going back to that statement of I've got to be careful of that statement, what do you mean by that?
I just don't want to debate doctrinal issues on this channel, because that's not what it's about. And I always get nervous about a video before we post it because of the backlash of comments we might get when that's not the purpose of this channel.
Yeah, so if we share anything about our beliefs, it's simply that. We're not dictating to you what you have to believe. That's not, again, what we're about. Even as witnesses, we weren't about that. We were into sharing what we knew, and if you came to the same conclusion as us, then great. If not, I'm not saying that we would sit there and argue with someone who wanted to believe that they were Muslim. I mean, obviously, we're not going to have much in common if you believe that at the split of Ishmael and Isaac, that Ishmael was the promised seed because he happened to be firstborn through a concubine. And that's really where it branches off from. So and I bring out that because it's an extreme point of difference to show that you're not going to continue with association in intimacy with an individual who takes on those ideas. Not to mean you hate the person, not to mean that you don't love that person still, and not to mean you don't even talk to that person, enjoy their company, but in spiritual association.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing, is that sometimes if you don't say enough, then all kinds of people want to plug in words that you didn't really say. And so it's like you got to really be watchful of what you say, because it's like you don't want to come across as somebody who doesn't give somebody else the freedom to choose their way of worship.
That's right.
So I never want to come across that way. I mean, if somebody who is Muslim wants to watch our channel because they want to get our perspective, we're not really here to talk about religious things. We're here to talk about injustice and hypocrisy among Jehovah's Witnesses, and their policies, and their culture and things like that. We're not talking about doctrinal issues.
And it leaves you with an interesting quandary, and I'd love to know your thoughts on this too. I know there are some individuals that I really, really respect who've left comments. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to name them by name here because I don't want to embarrass them. At the same time, I don't want to demean anybody else in their comments. So, but there are individuals who I would like to associate with more intimately. But how do you go about that? Other than, do you start your own Zoom group? It's interesting. Are you creating a sect by doing that? There are all sorts of interesting things to discuss other than, just calling somebody or having a one-on-one association, which is why we encourage people to contact us over on the Sign Vlog for more intimate personal association. Because the scripture still says what it says. Meet together to incite to love and fine works. Well, to love and fine works would obviously be what's in line with the scriptures. And I felt that as a witness. Well, these people believe many of the things that I believe. There are some I don't buy into. I go back to that guy in Park River that I talked to. And
He said, I don't believe everything they believe. I said, neither do I. So what? They still believe more things, and you agree that they believe more things that you believe are true compared to other religions, so why wouldn't you associate with them? Well, now I can say, because they'll chop your head off if they don't believe everything. So that's kind of an interesting dynamic there. Is there another opportunity that's arising, just like in the Jewish days when that system was going down, and they didn't recognize it, the Jews didn't, that they needed to flee to the mountains. Flee to the mountains and get away because the destruction is near. And they were so certain, those zealots were so certain Jerusalem wasn't going to go down and Jehovah was going to swoop in and save them. And Josephus goes into a lot of talk about that. But it didn't happen that way, did it? And is it the same way? I know that Tiffany and I were discussing that. Is it the same way today? Now's the time to get out of it. Because we can see the unrighteousness and they refuse, just like the stiff-necked Israelites repeatedly refused to be corrected, to be adjusted, to listen to the lowly. And again, people want to say, oh, they were prophets. Those were prophets. They weren't known as prophets until after it all happened. They just drew attention to injustices. I was not a prophet. I'm not the son of a prophet. Nonetheless, this is what Jehovah says. This is what the one who causes things to become says. This is what has been recorded for us in the scriptures that we had at the time. And you're not living up to it. You're defrauding the alien resident, the lowly. You're beating your fellow slave. You're going beyond the things written. Here it is, Brother Splain says at the annual meeting, we can't do antitype and typical and antitype because we simply cannot go beyond the things written. And I've got an elder that sits with me in a judicial committee and says, beyond the things written is what the Watchtower says. Well, wait a minute. It can't be both ways. That's hypocritical. It can't be, we can't go beyond the things written, and what we write, you can't go beyond the things that we write. Well, wait a minute. They said that they can't go beyond the things written, referring to the Bible. So these hypocrisies like this, they're quite honestly, they're just adding up over and over and over again. That's the beautiful thing about a Christian religion, is it would today have to stand up to intense scrutiny. Intense scrutiny, because you know what? Truth, as an elder said to me, who thinks he owns a congregation, thinks he owns the hall.
We need to give this guy a name.
No, I think it's best that way. But he said, truth stands on its own merits. That's absolutely true. Too bad he didn't hold to it in the end. Mm-hmm. Truth didn't stand on its own merits. If you questioned it and it wasn't true, it's what the organization said that goes over the top of it. And that's no different than the captain, for example, that got pulled from the battleship, the aircraft carrier. He wrote the message about the outbreak going through their ship, and they pulled him out. Oh, you have to do that. And it's the same thing that Trump says. Oh, they're doing a great job. Everybody's doing a great job. Everything's a great job, and you have to agree with it. Now, granted, there's the other side of the spectrum, and you can see it in the questions that are given at some of those press meetings, those presidential press meetings, and you can't be happy one way or another. And so we don't want to be that way either, to where, oh, it's 6-1, and if you do it that way, we're going to say, oh, that was wrong. Well, why didn't you do it the other way? And then if they do it that way, you go, oh, well, why did you do it this way? Why aren't you wearing a mask? Because I don't feel like it. If I commanded everybody wearing a mask, then it would be, what is this, China? It's a communist government now, and you're going to make it like China. This is dictatorial. You can't have it both ways. But one thing this country doesn't do is it doesn't cut off your head if you don't agree, which is exactly what Watchtower does. Anyway, I'm going off on more soapbox moments.
I don't remember what my point was. I think one of the things I had said was when you were talking about the Christians during the time of Jerusalem and heeding that warning of getting out, when they had the opportunity before it would be too late. That's what the point was, is as far as having a I'm gonna sneeze.
Coronavirus! 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 The sky is falling! The sky is falling!
No.
We heard a rumor that today there's a case in Langdon.
Come on, we're talking about this.
Okay, sorry.
Um,
Don't know if it's true. Small town rumors, you never know. Go ahead.
that point about the Christians leaving when they had the opportunity, and that showed their love for Jesus and the relationship that they had with Jesus. I mean, he'd been gone for a few decades, so it wasn't like there was a physical person telling them, okay, this is what you need to do.
Yeah, and I like that video as far as, don't get me wrong, there's their whole materialism ploy in it, whatever else.
Mm-hmm.
In the Watchtower video. What is that video? Do you remember that video? What's the name of it?
I don't remember. Is it the Live by Sight? I don't
Live
remember.
by faith, not by sight.
Yeah, something like that. I don't know.
Anyway, where they're fleeing Jerusalem. And the reality was, when you look at it, there were a few individuals who'd left, and they just kind of had to settle on their own. And they got settled into groups. And it kind of goes along with Ezekiel. When you talk about Ezekiel and it talks about the sheep being scattered and that he will bring them back together. At some point in time, that's got to happen. I don't know how or when. Because it's true, you can't have a vast labyrinth of beliefs of untrue, and you should be able to narrow down certain things that are true in the scriptures just by looking. I don't know if I've ever done this on this, but if you take a piece of paper, can I write on this? It's just a scrap piece, right?
No.
Let me go grab something else. How about this?
Find some important tax document.
How about this?
Can I write? Can I scribble a picture on this?
So you take an idea and you have two opposing hubs of truth. And there appears to be a scripture that goes between them. Well, is it the left truth or the right truth? Which one's actually truth? They both can't be true. They're opposing. So you look up another scripture. And it sort of crosses that scripture in subject matter. And again, it still seems like it's pointing to both of them. But which one's the hub of truth? Because they can't both be true. So you look up another one. You go, oh, wait a minute. That one's kind of points to the one, but it really isn't. The one on the one side seems to definitely point to it, but the other one not quite as much. Maybe it's not definitive in your own mind yet. So you look up another scripture. Now wait a minute. That one definitely does not point to the other one. I mean, you might be able to stretch it, but it's not really pointing that way. So you look up more scriptures. Maybe you just find it in your personal study or whatever else. Well, it seems to be pointing to the one, and it kind of points back to the other one a little bit closer, but again, doesn't really point to that other one. Again, it's a stretch, but it's not definitive in my own mind yet. Maybe I'll find something else in my personal study later. So you look up more scriptures. Okay, now wait a minute. That scripture definitely does not point. It points to the one, but it definitely does not point to the other one. There's just no way that scripture applies to that one subject matter. But, just one, maybe I'm misunderstanding it. So through my personal study, or maybe even through other people and their ideas and what they've thought, I'll look up more scriptures. Okay, there's another one. It definitely doesn't point to that. I'm starting to get convinced which one this is that it points to. Which is the hub of truth here. And slowly but surely, as you look up more scriptures, you start to see what the hub of truth is. And as you continue to study, you end up finding more and more spokes of truth as you go through. And it becomes obvious that some scriptures, though they seem like they point that direction, they are not going to that hub of truth.
as the truth anyways. They're pointing this other direction. And more of them seem to be pointing that way. So you keep doing this research. And at some point, you become convinced in your own mind. I can't decide when that is for you. Maybe it's only after you've got 3 or 4 of those spokes drawn out that point one direction. Maybe for someone else, it's 9 or 10 of them. But at some point, you're like, you know what? There's just enough evidence here for me to be able to identify the hub of truth that all the spokes of the bicycle wheel point to. And that is a great study method. And it helps you to discern what one hub of truth is versus another. Because all the emotion in the world, all the people and their opinions in the world aren't going to override the abundance of scriptures. 2 or 3 scriptures is not enough. I know you've probably heard that. Oh, if you've got 3 scriptures to point to a subject matter, that's probably enough. I personally don't believe that's true. It may give you an inkling of where you're going to be heading in a certain direction, but I don't believe that's true. It varies per individual and what they need for convincing evidence. Now, again, I'm not saying you have to have every spoke of the wheel. Maybe that's only half of them. That's interesting. When you're talking about a bicycle wheel, you can have 122 spoke wheels. I think that's right. Or you can have one that's a whole lot less. Maybe it's just a wagon wheel, and there's only a few that point to it, and that's all that's necessary for you. Maybe you need all 122 of them. I don't know. Hopefully not. Hopefully you can gain your faith a lot quicker than that. But that's a good way of studying to point and identify what truth is.
I like that illustration with the train.
Yeah, that's actually in one of our Bibles.
Where are we going to find that?
Yeah, we'll save that for another one.
Okay.
But we will give a passive reference to it, because a lot of people will say how they feel. Feeling doesn't mean any more to me than an individual saying, I just got a feeling and I should partake today. What you feel doesn't mean anything. Scriptural fact.
What do you know?
Is what matters. And yes, your feelings can follow it. But the Bible that we've got has a picture of a train in it. And it's got a coal tender with a locomotive and a caboose. And the caboose, it says emotion. And this one is knowledge or whatever. And anyways, the point is that your emotion should be followed. Pulled by what it is that you know. We'll have to dig that out.
Yeah, it's good.
But it's literally in the front of a Bible.
Mm-hmm.
Not a JW Bible.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're looking at scriptures too, another one that you can do, and I've heard a lot of people manipulate, and they say, oh, Jehovah's Witnesses have their own Bible. Well, that's a good argument. At the same time, so do so many other religions. There was somebody who sent me recently a video of a guy and what he was talking about, and I'm like, well, he has a personal preference to that translation. And here's an easy way to do it. I said, just go to Bible Hub. It'll pull up 50 different translations or whatever it is, and you can look at it. You can look at it and see. And that's the same thing with Jehovah's Witnesses. Oh, it says peace and security. And this ski elder made the comment of, well, there are different translations that say peace and safety, but only the New World Translation says peace and security, and that happens to be the phrase that they're using. So I went over to Bible Hub. Boop, boop, boop. Yes, some other translations use peace and safety. The vast majority say peace and, you happen to be on Bible Hub.
Security.
Peace and security. Name some Bibles that say that.
English Standard Version, Berean Study Bible, Berean Literal Bible.
So here he is touting the New World Translation when there are several translations that make that point.
Christian Standard Bible.
So you can do a Bible Hub search. You don't need to know original Greek, although the interlinear is handy. You have to be careful of literal word translations. For example, I have a tear in my eye and a tear in my heart. you have to realize that words are the same and have different meanings. And that's all over, even in the English language. So realize that doing a literal word-for-word translation may not necessarily work when you're talking about finding the meaning behind a word.
Mhm.
But just to make that point, that it's pretty easy to discern truth by looking at variants of scriptures. So we just encourage people to keep up their studies. I know it's difficult. A lot of times, as being witnesses, we're very much like the individuals that dealt with the Pharisees, and their stomach turns when you look at the scriptures. You just hear them, and the hypocrisy is just glaring. It's interesting. The hatred is not necessarily for the scriptures, as they say. Well, what did Jehovah do to you? It was these men. Yeah, it was this men in this organization that did it to us. Don't confuse that with Jehovah, because a lot of times you will find validation in the scriptures to show that they're the ones doing it to you, just as they were all the way along. All the way along, it was God's organization that was stripping the skin off of people, that was not treating the fatherless boy and the widow with concern. It's just repetitive.
Mhm. True. No, it's hard when religion has been used like a weapon.
Yeah.
That's,
It's funny because Watchtower used to claim that about the other religions.
But
Now they're the ones doing it.
They do it horribly. Yeah,
now
they
they're the
do
ones
it
doing
horribly.
And a lot of the things that they've done and they've taken on now are just an imitation of the exact same things that they revolted against, if you read it. And
They are becoming Catholic.
in
they
their
are
ideology,
Catholic.
at least.
Yep, they
You know,
are.
maybe they hold to some core things that are good, like hellfire, that not believing in hellfire. The attitude and how they're carrying it out, they are beating their fellow slaves. But we did want to encourage people. It doesn't have to be fancy. Even if you didn't have time to do it today,
You grab them.
whine about Langdon
We got plenty to whine about Langdon.
from about October to April.
Mhm.
You can whine about the winter. But we do encourage people. It doesn't have to be anything fancy. And even if you didn't have time to do it, now, today, as we encouraged last year, the scriptures bring out, and witnesses even have this provision as well. You can do it a month later at the next full moon, because it's a lunar calendar, the Jewish one.
Speaking of which, there's supposed to be a really beautiful pink moon tonight. I wonder if we'll get to see it since it's raining right now.
Rain. You know how long it's been since we've had rain? At least 6 months.
Well, we had it last week, just for a short time, but yeah, it's been 6 months. Just
Yeah,
that
and then it
word-
turned to
just the
snow
word.
and 8-9 inches.
Just the word rain is just so endearing.
I love my sister. I didn't always love my sister. But she was complaining about the weather, and she lives in Tennessee, if you're watching. But I was like, it's beautiful here. It's wintertime, and we're like sitting on your porch listening to birds chirp.
Drinking coffee. It's like 50, 55 degrees. It was so nice.
Beautiful, except for every time I went down there, she gave me a cold.
December was so great.
And the cold for me is like coronavirus, I think. I mean, I'll literally have a cold for a couple months.
Yeah, he doesn't have the quick colds like, sometimes you get one and within the week you're fine, back to normal.
Oh my gosh,
Not this
I don't
guy.
know if it turns into nasal infection or whatever, but I mean, it will knock me out, and then I'm living off stinking.
That nasal spray?
It's like God is hooked up in a, anyway. Yeah.
And I don't know how it is that you catch things and I won't.
Colds.
Yeah.
So we make fun that if we got coronavirus, she'd be one to be affected, but apparently my immunity hasn't been too great lately, or maybe that just the cold's got my number. I don't know.
I don't think this coronavirus would be good for me.
She's got asthma, so
I don't think this outbreak would be good for me.
we take it pretty serious.
Yeah.
And we're gonna have an Airbnb video coming up. I'm not going to spoil that, though.
Yeah, stay tuned for that drama.
Anything else as far as memorial's concerned?
No, this has been plenty long.
So, enjoy your memorial. Remember Christ's sacrifice. I'm supposed to shut that off every time that I'm doing this.
Yeah, I want
I
to just say
forget.
one thing.
You go ahead.
I just want to apologize for. I just feel really tired today. I don't want to. I hope I don't seem like I'm. I'm just having a rough day, having a rough evening. Up early, tired, so tired.
And a lot of times these videos are sort of taking the angle of before they were sort of more informational, but we feel like a lot of people like that are out there doing their job and they're not bashing the Bible. There's really not much need for us to come on there, and except for, you can hang out with us for a little bit. If that's what it is, then so be it. So, hope you join us next time. Or not.
We don't care.
Much love. Enjoy your memorial.
Bye.